Well, welcome all. I know people are just joining us, and we're so glad you're joining us this evening. This session will be in English with simultaneous interpretation in Spanish. As such, everyone will need interpretation for this event. To choose your language on the computer, go to the globe symbol at the bottom of your screen and select English or Spanish. In the Zoom app on your phone or tablet, click on the plus symbol or the three dots and click on Language Interpretation and select English or Spanish, and make sure to hit Done to activate interpretation. Please put any questions you have about interpretation in the chat box. I know it's not always easy to understand doing this the first time, but we do have support if you have any questions. So we are very glad to be able to do this in English and Spanish. And this is the first time we're doing this, so bear with us. Welcome again, and thank you for joining Women's Way for the Closing the Gender Wealth Gap Forum on building an equitable business ecosystem for women of color entrepreneurs. When we refer to women, we mean trans and cis women and femme-identified people, which includes anyone who is not trans or cis woman, but who identifies as feminine, and also those who identify as gender expansive, non-binary, and or gender non-conforming. I'm Diane Cormier-Levy, the Chief Disruptor at Women's Way, and I'm so delighted that you all joined us for the next 90 minutes. While we wait for folks to sign on, we would appreciate you taking the poll. We want to know if this is the first time you're attending a Women's Way event. So if you could do that, that would be great. So today's forum is part of a year-long series whose purpose is to educate different stakeholders about the drivers of the gender wealth gap and action steps each of us can take to help close the gender wealth gap. Since October 2020, we have conducted 16 forums that have addressed different drivers of the gender wealth gap, such as strengthening the early childhood education sector, gender and racial disparities in healthcare, increasing access to affordable housing, promoting equity in grant making, and creating a more equitable tax code. Today's session focuses on what we can do as individuals and organizations to build a business ecosystem where women of color entrepreneurs can thrive. You will hear from three amazing panelists who will address the issue from a provider, investor, and fund management perspectives. You will also have opportunities to ask questions to the speakers via the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to address as many of your questions as possible. Closed captioning is enabled. If you do not want to see closed captioning, you can click Hide CC at the bottom of your screen. So many instructions here. Finally, the last thing, the chat is also enabled, so please share your comments throughout the session. To create a safer space for us to all engage in honest and challenging discussions, we ask that you each abide to the session's norms listed in the chat box. Finally, we will record the session and make it available for all of you to view again and for those who cannot attend today's session. After the session, we will also send you a list of resources related to today's topic and a survey to evaluate the session. We deeply value your input as we work to continue to improve these educational forums. So before we introduce you to the panelists and moderator, and I'm so excited about this discussion, I first want to thank Madre Tierra for their partnership in providing interpretation support for tonight's session. I also want to thank our sponsors listed on the slide. A special thanks to our signature sponsor, JPMorgan Chase & Company, for their very generous support. I would now like to introduce Lorane Rodriguez, Executive Director for Community and Business Development at JPMorgan, who will just share some welcoming remarks. Lorane.
Thank you so much, Diane. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my honor and privilege to be here today and represent JPMorgan Chase's work for gender equity. Like Diane said, my name is Lorane Rodriguez. I'm an Executive Director for Community and Business Development for JPMorgan Chase in the tri-state area. My job is to lead a team of community managers in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut that work on delivering financial health workshops to underbanked and underserved communities. Like Women's Way, JPMorgan Chase is focused on gender and racial equity. Roughly half of our 290,000 employees are women. In 2018, JPMorgan Chase formalized Women on the Move, which empowers the advancement of women with the mission to help drive their professional and personal development. Women on the Move is creating a more equitable workforce that will enable women to achieve financial well-being, grow their skills, and advance their careers. One of Women on the Move's key objectives is providing education and tools to increase the financial health and independence of women in our communities. We are committed to helping women feel more confident about their financial futures by increasing their financial acumen. Since 2020, Women on the Move has enabled financial literacy training for more than 60,000 women and girls through partnerships with over a dozen national non-for-profits, women-led businesses, and universities. Women on the Move has also connected Chase's community managers, which is my team, with its sponsorship partners across the U.S. to deliver Chase's proprietary Your Financial Journey workshops, both in person and virtually. These workshops support goal setting, budgeting, savings, and credit. We serve as Ignite's financial literacy partner and have scaled financial content for Gen Z and millennial women via Instagram Lives and Instagram Reels. We've sponsored Girls Inc.'s rollout of the Investing Matters Challenge, providing middle and high school girls with real-life investing experience, piloted JPMorgan Investing 101 curriculum to adult women through our partnership with Women of Color in Capital. We've also curated a program, Coaching for Entrepreneurs. This program provides complimentary one-on-one business coaching, actionable insights to help accelerate women-run businesses. We've helped more than 1 million women collectively save more than $1.4 billion. Like I said, it is my honor and privilege to be here. So thank you again. We are proud to partner with Women's Way on this and many more initiatives of this kind. Thank you, and back to you, Diane.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you. So before we get to our panelists, which I know why you're all here, Kelly Shear, the director of the Gender Wealth Institute, and I are going to spend the next few minutes talking, just providing an overview of the gender wealth gap. Let me just get this going here. Basically, what are the drivers of what is the gender wealth gap? What are the drivers, and a high-level view of our theory of change about closing the gender wealth gap? So for those who don't know who we are, Women's Way is the region's leading for gender justice organization dedicated to the advancement of women, girls, and gender and racial equity. We've been around for 47 years, and we were the first funding federation in the United States that was specifically dedicated to advancing the status of women and girls. We know, and we heard a lot during COVID and post-COVID, just even pre-COVID, what was the economic state of women in our country? 80% of workers in the United States were living paycheck to paycheck. Majority are women. 40% of adults are not able to cover an unexpected $400 expense. Again, majority are women. And Philadelphia still has the highest poverty rate among the 10 largest cities, hovering around 25%. And the largest demographic group living in poverty, again, are women ages 25 to 34. So the gender wealth gap, which is worse than the pay equity gap, we hear a lot about the pay equity gap, which is a part of the gender wealth gap, but the wealth gap is even larger. Well, and you'll hear more about that. And it also relates to the retirement gap. 80% of women are likely to be living in poverty by age 65. So these are all related. And what's really scary is we don't address, if we see these trends continue across economic, health, political, and education equality, gender parity will not be achieved until 2133. And that's way too long, right? So if we look at the economic state of women, what is the gender wealth gap? Single white women own 56 cents on the dollar compared to single white men. And it gets a lot worse for Hispanic women own 10 cents and non-Hispanic Black women own 5 cents. So the U.S. wealth gap is especially large for families headed by women of color. And this wealth gap has not improved since COVID. In fact, it's worsened. So what are some of the realities around the gender wealth gap? Why is that? Well, some of the causes are women earn less than men. In fact, Pew just came out in 2022 that women earn on average 82% of what men earn. And there's many reasons for that. It's even in the same occupations, but it also has to do with occupational segregation, where fields dominated by women are often valued less and paid less. Women are also more likely to be denied mortgages, even though they're better at paying back mortgages. They're more vulnerable to predatory lending. More women are graduating from college, which is great, but they also hold more debt, including 2/3 of all student debt. And women still provide the majority of unpaid caregiving, which has a huge impact on women's ability to generate wealth. And we're going to talk about the flow of capital, which is critical in terms of how it impacts women, how it impacts women entrepreneurs. And we're going to have a great discussion about that. So if you look at the US economic pyramid, 1% of the population holds 47% of the nation's wealth. And I just want you to sit with that. While 80% holds 9% of the nation's wealth. Now, this is not the most current data, and it's probably updated beyond this, but basically, to say that 1% of the population holds 47% of the nation's wealth is not a sustainable economic system. And in order to have that kind of wealth at the top 1%, it depends on extracting wealth from the majority of us. And so you'll hear a lot more about wealth extraction and what role that plays in perpetuating and upholding our current economic system. So this economic system is harming millions of people, including our planet. And like I said, it's not a sustainable system. So let's talk about the flow of capital real briefly. Black and brown women are the fastest growing entrepreneurs, but receive 0.0006% of all venture capital financing. Well, why is this? Well, one of the things we have to look at, who controls the decisions on how capital flows, right? In 2020, and I think this was from Rue's book, XX Edge, only 3% of decision makers at venture capital firms in the United States were Black, and only 9% were women. And of all US assets under management, 98.6% are managed by firms owned by white men. Okay, lack of diversity up there, right? Who's controlling how this capital flows? And then what is the primary role of capital in our current economic system? Well, basically, it's maximizing profits for the wealthy. The system is developed, the financial system is developed to make the wealthy more wealthier. And this whole myth of fiduciary duty, which basically says we must protect and expand capital, no matter the consequences to society or the planet. So when you talk about maximizing profits without talking about the costs to human beings and lives and the planet, that is the primary role of capital in our current economic system. So what do we do about it? We'll be talking a lot about this with the panelists. But first, and this is from Marjorie Kelly's book, which I all recommend that you read, Wealth Supremacy. We must recognize that our current financial situation is an emergency. And how she describes it is, it's an emergency of financialization, which is the unrelenting problem of too much financial extraction. And the way this is locked in, because the unseen ruling class has our society in a stranglehold, quietly crushing the resilience of families and democracy. Again, to have that much wealth at the top 1% requires a system of extracting wealth from the majority of us. So we had to tap into our imaginations and envision a new economic system where capital will no longer be in control, but in service to life, and create pathways to build a financial system that distributes capital in a way that is just, sustainable, and non-extractive. So I want you all to have an open mind that our current capitalistic economic system was designed with certain purpose and roles. And since it was designed and constructed, we can deconstruct it, we can challenge and create a new economic system. So creating a new normal requires a new bold vision, one that provides solutions to centuries of systemic exclusion, extraction, and exploitation, and that basically has undermined our economic potential in the United States. So we at Women's Way had started something called the Gender Wealth Institute about 2 years ago, and our vision is really to close the gender wealth gap by advancing research and practical solutions that build wealth for women who are economically insecure. And now I'm really honored to introduce Kelly Shear, who is the director of the Gender Wealth Institute. Kelly.
Great, thank you. I'm here to provide framing and context for the connection between white supremacy and the gender wealth gap. Why are we talking about white supremacy? White supremacy is a tool used to create, maintain, and perpetuate all gender and racial inequities. It is the operating framework or the motherboard of how inequities work. Next slide. White supremacy functions in a variety of systems. The common thread is the privileging of a constructed definition of whiteness and the dehumanization of all others. Whiteness becomes an asset. Take a minute to review how white supremacy shows up in various systems. Next slide. As we have the conversation about creating an equitable ecosystem for entrepreneurs, you'll hear statistics and stories that highlight disparities. What we want to think about is why that is. One narrative that is frequently upheld around the American dream is that anything is available to anyone who works hard. But when there are patterns around diminished access, poor outcomes, and entrenched barriers, this should alert us to the fact that systems are creating patterns of experiences. White supremacy supports the idea that whole groups of people, racialized minorities, women, etc., have inherent deficiencies or cultural deficits that explain poor outcomes. The blame shifts. Those people aren't choosing the right industries to start businesses in. Women have not pitched effectively. They don't have enough experience, credit, worthiness, etc. The problem is located within individuals or within groups, but never within a system. Magical unicorns are upheld as evidence that success is possible. Look at this wealthy owner of color. Look at this female magnet. And we are all trapped by the idea that we just need to hack the system, work harder, be immaculate, cunning, ingenious. But is it possible that all of us are the problem and not that the system is functioning as intended to hoard wealth for the few and keep the majority fighting against each other and their own selves for scraps? When you hear things like business owners of color are denied loans at rates twice as high as white business owners, or that even locally, that there are low rates of business lending in Black and Latino neighborhoods in Northwest and Southwest Philadelphia, start to question what rules could produce such experiences. Next slide. Let's zoom out just a bit to understand the entrepreneurial landscape in Philadelphia. Here are some statistics to help ground us in understanding. Keep in mind the context. In a city that is majority minority, why might these numbers look like this? Next slide. In the Gender Wealth Institute, we sought to better understand the entrepreneurial experience of women in our April survey. As we build out an index that measures changes in the wealth experience of women and tells the story of felt experiences and connects to structural barriers, we wanted to ask women why they chose entrepreneurship, what they needed to be successful, and what stood in their way. Greater details are in our report, but in our first round of survey, we heard less than desirable outcomes for female entrepreneurs. And I'll just point to one statistic here, that less than 50% of respondents in our survey believe that entrepreneurship empowers them significantly more than traditional employment structures. Next slide. In thinking about an entrepreneurial ecosystem, it's important to start with the definition. An ecosystem is a system of actors and relations that directly or indirectly support the creation, sustenance, and growth of new and existing ventures in a city. This is more than just the ability to start a business. Starting a business is important, but the ability to sustain, grow, and scale a business tells you more about the conditions that support or thwart success. If we think about a garden analogy, this is more than just the ability to afford the seeds or having the right tools. We need to know the condition of the soil and the climate. Next slide. The ecosystem contains more agents and actors than just the entrepreneurs and potential customers and consumers. There are a variety of decision makers and influencers that can determine the vitality of the harvest. This list is non-exhaustive, but should point us to consider who are the decision makers, what influence do they have on the ecosystem, and maybe most importantly, what assumptions are they operating on? How do the rules of capitalism or wealth supremacy or white supremacy influence their context? Next slide. The needs of an entrepreneur can be organized in these three buckets: capital, networks, and resources. An entrepreneur needs knowledge and resources, champions and conveners, access points, and stories. Each of these supports help entrepreneurs navigate the challenges of their business and the ups and downs of the economy, as well as introduces them to opportunities and collaborations that can be life-sustaining. Questions to consider here. What do we know about experiences and needs of entrepreneurs? How is knowledge shared and scaled? Where are the networks and communities, and how can they be accessed? Is there transparency in the methodology in lending decisions? What is creditworthiness, and how is this framework applied to different groups? Next slide. Another important consideration in the entrepreneurial ecosystem is the work to be done in the garden. Thinking about cycles of growing, harvesting, and the like, there are cycles of activity in a business, non-linear, and again, non-exhaustive, but helpful in broadening our understanding. Yes, entrepreneurs have to pitch, they have to apply for funding. But depending on their business, they also need to train and improve the skills of staff, network in their industry, automate their processes, scale their operations, connect to contracts, seek opportunities, and more. In an ecosystem, all these activities need to be coordinated in a way that allows for success. Next slide. As we dive into our conversation with panelists today, we want to remember what is at stake in building a more equitable ecosystem for women entrepreneurs. The underrepresentation of women in successful entrepreneurial ventures threatens the prosperity of our communities. Some estimates suggest that 2/3 of small local businesses, more likely to be owned by women, keep their revenue within the community. Women-owned businesses are more likely to employ women and devote a larger share of their income to health, education, and welfare. More broadly, even something as simple in concept as achieving gender parity in business growth could add up to $2.3 trillion to the global GDP. Think of the number of jobs that could create. Next slide. As we consider opportunities to create a more equitable ecosystem for women entrepreneurs, we should consider the implications of our vision for women at the intersection of a variety of marginalized experiences. What are the legal, cultural, and practical limitations on women's participation in entrepreneurship? When agents and actors attempt to correct for disparities, how are they protected or threatened? Additionally, what norms and values need to be challenged at a fundamental level? The realities we currently live in deserve to be questioned just as much as we deserve to devote our energies towards creating what we want and what we need. Next slide. And so, part of the work of liberation is to uncover the plot, that is, the intentions, actions, and outcomes, and we'll start to do that today with our panelists. Next slide. I'm now happy to turn over to our moderator, Nan Hutchinson, who is an advisor, board director, adjunct professor at Temple University, and a Women's Way board member. Welcome, Nan.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Well, Kelly and Diane, thank you so much for the data and the concepts and the thinking that really set the table for our conversation this afternoon. It's a daunting prospect that we have ahead of us here, and I'm looking forward to diving in with our panelists. So look, as part of this ecosystem, what can we do to help? Is patronizing women of color-owned businesses really enough to be impactful for the women of color's entrepreneurial community? And I throw that out to all of our panelists to comment on, please.
I'll start. My name is Iola Harper, and I work at the Enterprise Center. And I would say it's a great start. It's a great start, but it is not enough. Women entrepreneurs, in particular women entrepreneurs of color, have a wide range of needs. Among them, and at the top of the list, being access to capital. They need access to a network of people. They need mentors. They need a number of things. So it's supporting is probably the best thing that you can do, and it's a great start, but it is not enough.
And hi, I'm Ruth Shaber. I'm a physician and healthcare executive, but in my second career, I'm a philanthropist, investor, and now an author of the XX Edge, Unlocking Higher Returns and Lower Risk. And Iola is absolutely right. There's so much more that we can do as if we want to strengthen the women of color entrepreneurial landscape. Certainly, being a consumer is important. But if you think about all of the ways that that women entrepreneurs plug into a whole community of capital, how we invest our money, how we use our social capital and our networks, bringing our friends in. It's not just as an individual, but how do we sort of replicate the old boys networks that male entrepreneurs can benefit from, how money flows in all different kinds of ways. And I think we can get into some of those details with the further discussion.
And I'll hop in to introduce myself and double down on that. Cory Donovan here with ImpactPHL. We're a nonprofit here in the Philly region to encourage wealth to be more intentional about how they're investing. And to reiterate what Iola and Ruth said, I always like to say that just like any other business, those led by women of color need capital in order to grow and be successful. So if you are shopping with local diverse businesses, but your money's invested in Walmart and Amazon, your hands might not be aligned. In fact, one hand might be strangling the other hand. Same goes for a lot of other issues, climate change, health, education, et cetera. Any issue you care about, I think most people would be shocked to find out how and where their money is actually invested.
The things not all of us think about, for sure. Tell me a little bit more about the infrastructure that impacts women of color entrepreneurs, and how do those relationships and social capital influence the infrastructure, and how well does it work or not for women of color?
Well, you know, the infrastructure includes all the way that money flows. And I think in the opening slides, which is such a great and rich discussion about some of the problems in what that white supremacy brings to the barriers that women of color entrepreneurs have to climb. We know that women, in general, female founders are 63% more likely to have profitable companies over 10 years than male counterparts. We know that female-run startups are run much more leanly and are more likely to bring investors better returns on their investments. And we also know that the paradigm disconnect is that women are vastly underfunded. Only 3%, as we saw on the slides, only 3% of venture capital goes to women-owned startups. But ironically, women are much more likely to repay their loans. They are much more likely to bring benefit to their communities. And this is not a replacement strategy. This doesn't mean that we should fund women entrepreneurs over male entrepreneurs. Women entrepreneurs actually are more likely to grow the economy, both in their local communities and their families, but much more broadly too. So this disconnect in how money's invested and how capital flows to women entrepreneurs it just doesn't make sense, because they're actually, as an investor, they're the best bet that we have. And so how do we overcome the biases and cultural norms that make us think that for somehow capital shouldn't be provided to these women?
Iola, anything to add to that?
A lot. I mean, I just want to say that women, particularly African-American women, and we've all heard this, are told to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And what happens when you're born without boots and without straps and you don't know a bootmaker, right? And that is the condition and the state that a lot of Black women are in. So access to funding is key. And I'm sure we're going to get to it later, but having access to community development financial institutions, having access to low interest loans, having access to grants, having access to mentorship is really a key part of helping women of color really reach the level of parity that others, other races have reached.
Certainly seems like a net loss for society, given the statistics on how successful women and women of color are in their businesses, but they're not being able to get the resources to do what they want to do. Ruth,
I want to add one other thing that hasn't really come up yet, is that women, and this is something that we talk quite a bit about, my co-author Patience Maramay Ball and I in the XX Edge, that women tend to be closer to the problems that investors and society want to solve, whether it's in healthcare or education or the care economy or poverty alleviation or climate change, that women are the ones that are usually closest to these problems. And so they're much more likely to bring the innovative solutions to the table. And we need to, as investors, as capital owners and asset owners, we need to recognize that this is where innovation, this is where the change is going to happen and the transformation is going to happen.
So, sorry, please go ahead, Cory.
I was just going to jump in on that because I think the reality is that part of what we're talking about here is the way our financial system works, which makes it infinitely more easy to invest in Walmart and Amazon and even a company halfway around the planet than it is in your own community. So that's just an unfortunate reality. I like to say you live here, your kids go to school here, you work here, you grew up here, you volunteer in your community, you donate locally, everything about you is local except for one thing. There's a highway built to Wall Street. And, we like to say that our future will be determined by how we invest today. Also, if you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you always got. So we have to create change. And while there's a highway built to Wall Street that makes it very easy for our money to flow that way, we have to build, to mix metaphors, the plumbing in our own community to connect capital with the types of businesses that are good for Philadelphia, creating good outcomes for what is good for Philadelphia. And the Philadelphia region, when I say Philly, I mean, the collective region. It's not easy. It's not going to be as easy because, again, that plumbing has been well built for decades, if not centuries. But it's critical if we want to build an inclusive, sustainable, and resilient regional economy that doesn't create the problems at a faster rate and a larger scale than our nonprofits can fix. We have to do this work in our communities.
So speaking of communities, and I think hearkening back to something Iola said, there's a question that's come up that someone's asking, saying, how can we find mentorships?
That is an outstanding question. And a lot of people, when they envision having a mentor, they think it's somebody that's going to invite them into their office and sit down and give them wise words of counsel. Well, that could be the case, but you could also be mentored by somebody who has a business like yours. You could be mentored by anybody. So I'm going to say that it depends on the type of mentorship you're looking for. There are mentorship programs that are out there, but I'm going to suggest to everybody that's listening that almost anyone can be a mentor if they have information that you need or that you want. And there are ways to build relationships and to have coffee and to have lunch. It doesn't have to be the traditional sit down and have these serious, deep discussions. So I'm happy to talk to whoever asked the question about different mentorship programs that are available, but I'm going to tell you that you can be mentored by anybody that has information that you need.
So there's formal programs and then informal, good old networking.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Probably need to do both.
Yes.
Thank you. Ruth and Cory, what are we getting wrong about capital flow? As community members that want to support women of color businesses, how can we reframe our understanding?
Well, I want to bring up something that's really essential about how capital flows, and that's that entrepreneurship and having talented ambitious, exciting women of color come to the table with their ideas is essential. But who makes the decision about whether they get their money or not? For men, it's often their rich uncle that gives them money. But for women of color, it's more likely to be through some of these systems like venture capital or local loan programs. And like it or not, most of the people sitting around those tables deciding which companies, which entrepreneurs get funded are white men. And that's just the way it's been. And those are the jobs that are that women and people of color don't necessarily gravitate to, or they come into the financial industry excited and ambitious, but culturally they're not staying in the finance industry. It's not a good fit for them. They leave for whatever reason. So we're all investors, even if you don't think of yourself that way. We all make investment decisions, whether it's in which companies we buy from, but also how we invest our retirement accounts, our 401ks, or how we talk about the markets with our friends and relatives at the holidays. And we should be all starting to think about not just which companies we want to invest in, but who's making the decision, who's working at Fidelity or Vanguard or BlackRock and sitting around a table deciding which companies should be invested in. And those are called portfolio managers. And no matter how big your portfolio is, if you show up and say, gee, I want to know who's making the decisions about which companies I'm invested in, and demanding those answers, I think is a really important start that we can all make, no matter how big our portfolio is.
So we can ask for better. We can ask for better.
And we can ask for just transparency, I think is the first step.
Okay.
And I'll add on to that, because I think part of this is about intentionality, and part of it is about how the system works, and both have to change over time in terms of what we expect and what we want, and being out loud about it and talking to the people that manage our money. But also for us at ImpactPHL, it's about investing in our own communities. And when with regard to how we invest locally, there are some systemic things that sort of get in the way or dictate what we can do. And I don't want to get into a deep dive here, but there's differences if you're an accredited investor, which broadly speaking means you have $1 million of net worth. The world is your oyster. You can do whatever you want with your money. That's what our government and the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, says. You can do what you want with your money. And there are lots of local investment opportunities here that move money in different ways intentionally into communities of color, women-led businesses, and lots of other positive impact investment opportunities. That's if you're an accredited investor. And part of what we do here at ImpactPHL is identify those opportunities and help make them visible and help connect people's intentions and what they want to do with investable opportunities. Happy to talk with anyone who meets that criteria. Unfortunately, if you are in the other 85%, roughly, the rest of us who are not accredited investors, unfortunately, our ways to invest in our own community is actually somewhat limited. And again, don't want to go into a deep dive here, but it's mostly limited to, Iola mentioned community development financial institutions, CDFIs. Here in Philadelphia, we're fortunate to have 2 that are investable by the average person. And those are the Reinvestment Fund and Community First Fund. So you can invest as little as $1,000, and they invest your money into communities with intentionality. Community First Fund does 85% of their business in communities of color in terms of first-time home mortgages and diverse businesses. The other important thing in terms of investing in your own community, up until 2016 with the Jobs Act, a non-accredited investor, it was basically CDFIs. You didn't have a lot of other option to invest in your local community. But now with the Jobs Act and crowdfunding, most of us are familiar with GoFundMe or other platforms where people are asking for donations. But crowdfunding investing is also now, I think, over $1 billion has moved since 2016, which is a big number. But also when you take the entire investments globally, which is in the hundreds of trillions, it's a small drop in the bucket. But it now allows the rest of us to invest in websites like Republic and WeFunder and Small Change and Honeycomb Credit. And there are a number of others out there. Again, happy to chat with anyone who's interested in doing that. But that's how we all, to Ruth's point, is we all have a role here to change how money is moving.
Kind of excited about some of these concrete ideas that you're raising of things that we can actually go ahead and do. Tanya's
Well, I
raising.
think, I think, I just want to build on what Cory said too, that we're essentially all need to step up and be the network, that old boys network that that women of color don't have. And, at a small level or a large level that we can do that. And it's through our relationships and our social capital that we can really support.
Yeah, I just want to share a model that's being used. It's called the Circle of Aunts and Uncles. And it was created in part by Judy Wicks, who many people know is an entrepreneur and an environmentalist. But essentially, she got together with a number of other women and men. They all invested a portion of money, and then they select entrepreneurs to invest in. And the repayment is used to reinvest in other entrepreneurs. So it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to be part of an equity fund. You can creatively find ways to help and uplift women entrepreneurs. It does not have to be complicated at all.
Have we thought about challenges of women in the immigrant community being outside their countries? It's an extra element here. I assume that they are coming without those relationships of that community to help them do this. I think a lot of the same principles apply, but does anyone have any specific comments for that community? No. Okay,
Well,
but
I would just say that it starts with awareness, and we all have to overcome biases, and that if you know that there's a new immigrant community in your neighborhood that are struggling, to show up, to offer your own experience and mentorship. Everybody needs allies, and so it's just recognition and awareness. I think it's the first step.
thank you. Iola, what advice would you give to women of color who are considering starting and growing a business? How can we help them?
Well, I could take the rest of this seminar to talk about that. But there are a few key things that I think you should consider if you're thinking of starting a business. The first one is to get your business idea written down. And that could be either through a business plan or a business model canvas. There are a number of ways that you can record what it is that you have to do. And there are a number of agencies in the city of Philadelphia that can help you do it. But you have to commit your idea to paper. The second thing that you have to do is to know how much money you need. So I work with entrepreneurs a lot who will just throw a number out. I need $200,000. Well, what is that for? So you have to know how much you need and what you want to use the money for. Oftentimes, as I mentioned, I think in my first comment, we're told to bootstrap our businesses, which means we have to start with our money. And so you have to figure out, oftentimes, if you're not a technology-based business and you don't have access to startup capital or startup venture money, you have to figure out how to stair-step your business. So you have to figure out how to start it with $3,000. And then when you get money in, then how you can begin to get more and grow your business that way. But you have to know your financials. The third thing I want to say is do not quit your job. Do not have great ideas take time. And so I've seen people really ready to leave their job. A lot of us are ready to leave jobs and just kind of pursue self-employment, but you have to have a plan. You have to have an idea of how cash is going to flow before you leave your job. I have a lot of things here, but I think the last thing that I want to share is do not doubt yourself. A lot of women, especially Black women, we have imposter syndrome. Do not allow people around you to cause you to doubt your expertise or your business concept. Stick to it and do it. Now is our time. So I'm happy again to talk to anybody about startup advice, but those are my key pieces that I wanted to offer during this seminar.
Thank you.
Can I add to some of the things that Iola said, which are so brilliant? I love don't quit your job, but women tend to ask for less money than they need because they're so used to getting by on less and because they're not expecting to get funded. So when you do that budget and when you figure out what your needs are, add a little bit because you can't, things happen, you run into obstacles that you didn't expect. So be honest about what you think is actually what's going to support your idea. The other thing that I want to stress, I've met a whole bunch of women entrepreneurs who tend to hide some of their real life experiences that actually make them even better at what they're trying to innovate. And I think that, while you want to talk about whether, your business experience and the jobs you've had and all the great work that you've done, your personal experience taking care of 3 kids or how you had to work your way through college or whatever it is, actually makes you a better entrepreneur. And so to lean into your life experiences, I think that's something that we're not used to doing. As women, we are told to act more like men and to not talk about our kids or what's going on at home. But actually, I think that's part of our magic, is that we have these life experiences that makes us multitaskers and able to maneuver through all kinds of things while you're still keeping that job and you're trying to start a business too.
Thank you so much. Let's talk about policy for a minute. To all the panelists, how do you balance an awareness of policy landscape with making informed decisions at the individual level? Ruth, do you want to start?
Well, I'm not a great person to comment on policy other than to say that I think that the markets actually take care of a lot of this, and policy tends to lag. And we have a broken market system, absolutely, but that as consumers and investors, we can actually create the environment ourselves in many ways, whether on a local level, and policy tends to follow. There are lots of policy opportunities that we would love to see in terms of making it easier for women and people of color to be entrepreneurs, to loosen the restraints on capital, to actually demand diversity in the financial decision-making industries. But we shouldn't wait for policy to dictate how we conduct our own decisions and how we invest and consume products and support entrepreneurs.
Cory, what would you say to that? I think those are great points, but I know you probably have some additional perspectives.
Yeah, again, I think my perspective really comes down to more of we need to be our own advocates, more of know where your money sleeps at night. We're all investors. If you have a 401k plan, you have any money in the markets at all, you should know where your money sleeps at night, know what it's doing, and use that as to be an advocate to talk to your financial advisor. And I can make a recommendation later with a tool that you can easily use. And the evidence that we've seen at ImpactPHL is that the more people understand this, the more frankly pissed off they get once they understand things and what's happening when your money goes behind the curtain and what it does. And then the financial system needs to hear from all of us, the millions, the hundreds of millions of us who have money in the market and what we want. And I'll just share that here in the Philadelphia region, 4 foundations within the last 2 years that control hundreds of millions of dollars have changed financial advisors because they're not getting what they want. And their RFPs and what they wanted from their new financial advisor was more intentionality about how and where our money is invested. And Ruth did this with the Terra Health Foundation. And it's when people ask for this to say, hey, if you want my business, you need to do this. And all 4 of those organizations that changed financial advisors said, I want more intentionality and I want you to move more of my money into the local community. And again, that's not how money historically has been invested writ large. So the more we understand, the more we advocate, the more things change. And that's when we start to change the system where we get the products and the services that we want. Again, we can't do what we've always done. That we've seen the outcomes of that. We all have to take control of that. And just to add too, I think, and I'm worried about using this metaphor, but again, just to kind of drive, we can shop local, we can spend $100 or even $1,000, but tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. Let's not be penny wise and pound foolish. We have to engage the investment ecosystem around our money. Otherwise, we're not using what I would argue, outside your vote, the most powerful tool that we have is how investment capital moves.
I just want to add one quick thing. Black women are underrepresented in state contracting, in federal contracting, in city contracting. And like Cory said, please learn and begin to understand what the rules, what the policies, and what the laws say, and use your vote. Use your vote to get the right people in office that can advocate for you.
I want to stick one more thing in, and I'm not sure this is the right place to do it, but I also want to mention the PAGE program with the Economy League. PAGE stands for Philadelphia Anchors for Growth and Equity. The Economy League runs this. They engage the anchor institutions of the Philadelphia region to identify where and how they're spending money and where that money can be reallocated to local diverse-led businesses. So I think that's another good program that if anyone has connections to or works for a large supply institution, the Economy League can work with you to help diversify your supply chain. And if you are a small diverse business that is interested in those contracts, the Economy League, I would encourage folks to take a look at the PAGE program with the Economy League of Philadelphia.
Thanks. We have a question that came in from Taina Estramera. What advice would you give for a new entrepreneur that is hesitant to take out or even apply to be a business loan based on past personal experience of financial insecurity?
Yeah, like I would really, if your idea, if you've got a solid idea, you got to go for it. And I'm talking, this is my personal advice. I'm taking my professional hat off. Now's the time. And I wouldn't recommend a large loan, but you should take the chance. You've got a concept, if you've got a market and you've got a way to produce your product or sell your product, take a chance, because not taking a chance is worse than taking a chance and failing.
Nothing to lose.
I know that men fail all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely they do.
So there's a number of decision points at many levels of influence in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Which decision points feel most impactful for creating equity?
Well, I think Cory and I have certainly stressed this, where does your money sleep at night? And that's where you can get scale. I mean, as Iola is stressing, the entrepreneurship and how important it is to have that confidence to go for it. But the money needs to be there. And so, you have to have the scale and the billions of dollars, not just so. And, one thing that hasn't really come up is the pipeline of talent, and certainly into entrepreneurship, but into the financial industry more broadly. And we're not used to telling our daughters and little girls that finance industry is an exciting place to work. They don't have mentors. It's unlikely that their mom's in the industry because the numbers are so low. And so we need to look for the mentorship. We need to be encouraging even at the, financial literacy, even for young people, not just once they're have a great idea. So to think about, how do we strengthen the pipeline of talent coming into all of the places where financial decision-making is happening. It also includes politicians, encouraging young women to go to run for school board or the places, because financial decisions happen in all of these different nodes in our economy. And the supply chain for those entrepreneurs, how do they think about who's going to supply them with the raw materials that they need to make their products? So we need to be thinking about how to strengthen the economy for women of color at all of these different places. And it takes time and it takes patience, but we all have to be thinking about it.
For sure.
I would say probably, and I wasn't blessed to have a daughter. I was blessed to have a son.
Well,
But
we keep them too.
one of the important decision points that I made was to introduce him to entrepreneurship when he was 4 years old. And he had a paper route and he had a lemonade stand, and he began to get comfortable with money coming in and paying bills and money going out. And he understood cash flow, even though I didn't call it cash flow. So really introducing young people, introducing your children to finances, to economics, to entrepreneurship is a key point that will help them become comfortable enough to speak up, to say things, to pull themselves up to tables that maybe they wouldn't have pulled themselves up to had they not had the experience and the knowledge. So really that's an important intersection point for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Got a couple questions that have just come up on the chat that are much more short-term, here and now type of questions. So there's one, this first one from Geneva, who says, I want to start a nonprofit and build on vacant residential lots in North Philly community, but there's so much politics surrounding the zoning. I see companies taking over blocks all the time. How do I receive assistance with my program?
Are you already a nonprofit, or do you want to form a nonprofit?
Wants to start a nonprofit.
So even you have to get your nonprofit up and get it running. But in the meantime, you should be networking with politicians. You need to be at the zoning board meetings. You need to begin to understand the process of acquiring property or acquiring groups of houses or groups of or swaths of land, so that when you're ready to engage, you already have information and knowledge to build on. That would be my first step. Forming a nonprofit takes some time. But while you're doing that, you can also begin to understand the process, begin to get some mentorship in those areas, talk to developers. There's a group called the Black Squirrel. They are made up of Black and brown developers that you may be able to talk to somebody there to get some information and ideas about how they do what they do. So again, you can multitask while forming your nonprofit, get the information, start getting some of the information that you need.
Sounds good. Geneva, I hope that answered your questions as a place to start. Monique has asked, can someone use equity in their mortgage to invest in a business of their own or someone else's?
Not my area of expertise per se, but certainly you can take out a home equity loan and then make that investment.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. Don't know. What's the key to connecting to larger contracts as an entrepreneur? I know we discussed this in our panel early discussions. But
the key to connecting to larger contracts is to do smaller ones successfully. So you've got to get a small one. You may get one for $100,000 and do that well. And then you get one for $150,000 and do that well. And you really, it depends on the type of business you have, whether you can get insurance and bonding and all of the stuff that you need to actually fulfill the contract. But the key is stair stepping. I said that earlier. You want to start with the small contracts. And once you do them and do them well, and you understand how they work, then you can begin to get the larger contracts.
So much of our conversation is going back to the importance of having a network and relationships with people that are part of this ecosystem. There's a question here saying, could you name some networks of women entrepreneurs that people can connect to?
Yeah, there's National Association of Female Entrepreneurs. I think it's NAF. I have a list that I can provide with at least 4 organizations that I would recommend that that I can send to you. And maybe we can get it out to the participants that way. But I do have some names.
Great. Okay, so being a conscious consumer is obviously not quite enough. We need to build relationships. We need to ask for transparency, and we need to ask for better investment policies, among some of the things that we've mentioned. What other steps can we take as community members to support these entrepreneurs?
I'll tackle that one for a moment. You can use your phone to search for women-owned businesses near you, right? Google is amazing in that. And when you get to know whether it's a business, bricks and mortar business, or some product that you're buying from a startup company, ask, what do you need? What's your pain point right now? And even if you can't help them, if you don't have the resources, just being able to talk it through, and maybe you do know somebody that could help them. It doesn't necessarily mean they need a loan. It could be something else. They're having some problem working through some city regulation, or their plumbing, it could be anything. And so just starting a conversation with people in your community who you want to support, I think is the first step. And word of mouth is so powerful.
Cory, Iola, any other thoughts?
Well, if I'm allowed to expand the question, because I think Ruth, I think we've talked about some different ways. And again, for me, this is really about how capital moves and changes. So how we have capital change, how it flows. First and foremost, there's a tool I referenced earlier called Invest Your Values from an organization called As You Sow. Anybody who has any money in mutual funds, you should use that tool and take a quick look. What I love about it is you don't have to understand what a PE ratio is. They use letter grades across different lenses, including gender, which Ruth helped bring about. And you can take a look at how your money's invested. And every time I do this with someone, I do live exercises. They're shocked at where their money is invested. Also, the book over Ruth's left shoulder, The XX Edge, pick it up, read it. She's referenced a number of data points. That'd be my second suggestion. Third is there's a organization called Invest for Better that forms cohorts of women throughout the country about how and where their money is invested. Margaret Berger Bradley, who is on the board of ImpactPHL, started one here in Philly, and I think we'll probably do more down the line. Again, I think a lot of this is connecting with people to think through how our money is invested and where, and kind of going back to Iola's point, forming groups about, hey, here's a local business that needs some money. What can we do together? And I always say, imagine a world where all of us are literally invested in the businesses in our community. When that business is struggling now, it's like, oh, that's a bummer, they're struggling. When it's our money that's invested, we're going to think and act differently. We're going to think twice before shopping at Amazon if we are invested in the local hardware store, or we are invested in the local restaurant as opposed to going to Applebee's. We're going to think twice about that. So I think that's sort of the world that I want to live in, and I think most of us would probably enjoy living in. So for me, again, those are some tools and some ways that we can think about how our money is invested. I referenced earlier crowdfunding sites. Again, I've done a number of those myself. I think an important decision point that you asked earlier, Nan, that I didn't comment on, is the easy road is to let our money flow to Wall Street. We all have a decision point around, do we take the easy road, or do we do the things that are more work and a little less comfortable because it's a new path? And that's a decision point I think we all have to make. And then I'll just wrap up by saying, for those who are accredited investors on this call, who can do whatever they want with their money, again, I think ImpactPHL is a tool for you to really open up how capital can flow into our local community in different ways.
Yeah, what I was going to say, both Ruth and Cory have said it.
Sorry.
There's other types of capital besides financial capital. You want to share your intellectual capital, things that that would help them. And you want to share your social capital, people that because sometimes who is more important than the money that you have in your pocket, or who you know can lead you to get money in your pocket. So to women entrepreneurs who are in need, you want to share both your intellectual and social capital with them.
That's great. Great advice. You know, it's so daunting because to really get us on an even playing field, it's going to require years and years of building our platform. But what I loved about today's panelist is giving us some really short-term actions that we can go ahead and exert our power for good and make this a better, more friendly place for women entrepreneurs. Is there any questions for the Q&A? We can turn it over to the audience if there's any questions or anything right now.
While that's happening, Nan, I'll just follow up on the point you just made, which is to, you know, it's pretty obviously we didn't create this system overnight. We're not going to change it overnight, but we do need to get started immediately. And again, it's a collective effort. We shouldn't be sitting around wondering who's doing what. We should all be taking an active role.
Do what we can now, because at least it's a movement forward. Well said. Thank you.
I'm curious if there's any entrepreneurs in the audience who have things they can teach us all about their experiences.
Oh, there's another question on the Q&A. How can we connect with the women here? Geneva, I'm not sure if you're looking for all the women that are, or all the people that are attending this session. Are you speaking of the panelists? I'm not sure. Let's see. Oh, everyone. Right. Jessica, maybe you can help with that answer. Oh, people are loving that idea, Geneva. You're an influencer.
We'll be sending out an email following this session. And if you want to opt in on being connected to the people that were in this session, we can make that work. We can't just share everybody's information without permission, of course. But if you reply to the email that I'm going to send you, that coincidentally has a survey that we'd love you to fill out about this session, you can just reply to that email and I will compile a list for you.
Very helpful. Thank you. I'm not seeing any. Oh, there's maybe one more question. No, that's those are some other comments. If there's no,
I think that Tiana, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. I think you're really spot on about being role models. Especially for our kids, but kids in our communities. It doesn't have to be your own biologic children that we're helping. And if you're preferentially going to a business that you know is owned by a woman of color, be loud and proud about it, and make it clear to whoever's going shopping with you that that's why you go to that store.
I love that.
And Nan, Geneva also said that she could share her experience. I can give her permission to speak if you would like.
Sure. Yeah, the more voices, the better.
Hello, everyone.
Geneva, you should be able to chime in now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Geneva, and I've been an entrepreneur for a few years now. I started off with my own clothing brand. I entered a business.
I can't hear you anyway.
I entered a business pitch competition
Oh, yeah.
with the Enterprise Center in West Philadelphia. And then I started my business from there, but it kind of like grew into other things. It started off, I was just doing t-shirts. And then I actually learned how to screen print and purchase printing equipment. And I started reaching out because I used to run track. So my college friends and teammates, they were all working, and I reached out to them. And that's how I got my first contract, screen printing. And so I would, some of them were actually athletic directors, so I would print their shirts for them. And then it kind of grew from there. And people call me now like a serial entrepreneur. But one thing is like I follow through on the things that I set out to accomplish. And I actually go to programs that help me to complete a step within my business plan. So for example, I've been through Graduate Philadelphia, I've been through CCP Power Up program. Um, and all of these things help you to connect and actually people need to be like kind of creative when they explore and do things in their business plan because people sometimes judge a book by its cover. But once you go to these programs and you begin to network and you begin to open up and you actually know, wait a minute, I sell candles and this person sells beads, but we still have something in common. We can network, we can do pop-up shops together. You know, they might know someone that does marketing and you might know a photographer. So it's the little things that you can do and the small networks and connections that you make in various programs to help you become a little bit well-rounded in what you do as a business person. That's all. Thank you.
That's wonderful story and wonderful experience, Geneva. And we certainly wish you well as you move forward in your endeavors. But those are great examples of the kinds of things that the panelists were discussing in terms of, you know, finding your people, finding other people that are trying to accomplish similar things and getting into some of these communities like these business plan competitions. Those are all very good things. I know I work with an organization in New York that does business plan to become part of a program. It's called Springboard. It's for women entrepreneurs in New York. But as you get part of those programs, you meet more and more people that are trying to do what you're trying to do. And those are just great examples. All the very best to you. Okay. Oh, let me just see if this is another. We have a person, Via says, she's feeling too old to start a business at 50. I could tell you at 50, you can start a second career. But does anybody else want to comment on that?
Absolutely. You can start at 60, you can start at 70. You are not too old to start a business. So please don't be fearful. Forge ahead. Don't think about your age. Think about your experience and think about the seasoning that you have that's going to allow you to really excel. So don't be scared because of your age.
Okay. Before I turn it to Kelly to close out, is there any other final comments from any of these wonderful panelists that we've had the privilege to hear from today? Any other questions? I don't see any coming up. Okay, let's take it back to Kelly. And thank you all so much for this really inspiring and empowering conversation.
Great, thank you. And Diane, if you can bring the slides back up. As that's happening, I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you for your attendance and participation and engagement. Special thanks to our moderator, Nan Hutchinson, and our panelists, Iola, Cory, and Ruth. Thank you for sharing your experiences, your expertise, and giving us a lot to think about. Just a reminder to folks on the call that this series, Closing the Gender Wealth Gap series, is ongoing. So we'll continue to explore how to close the gender wealth gap. And moving into next year, when we start our next sort of cohort of closing the gender wealth gap, we're moving more into a solution space. So we're going to be thinking and talking about how different groups and organizations and coalitions and networks have attempted to find their own strategies and pathways to closing the gender wealth gap. So we invite you to continue to join us in that series. But for today, again, thank you everyone for your participation. A reminder to please take the survey to let us know how that went for you and give us suggestions and feedback about what we can do to better serve you. Also, a reminder that we will send out a resource list that includes what some of the resources that were mentioned today and additional ones that the panelists recommend. So do not despair if you couldn't catch everything and you're like, oh, what was that thing that someone said? We'll send out the resource list, and also a reminder that this is recorded, so you can always go back and rewatch to hear and grab what you might have missed. But yeah, but we encourage you to check out social media and our website for announcements, and continue to join us in our invitation to fight and close the gender wealth gap. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you all.